the city. And when they come out against us just as before, we shall flee before them. And they will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city. For they will say, they are fleeing from us just as before, so we will flee before them. Then you shall rise up from the ambush and seize the city, for the Lord your God will give it into your hands. And as soon as you have taken the city, you shall set fire to the city. You shall do according to the word of the Lord. See, I have commanded you. So Joshua sent them out, and they went to the place of ambush.
Okay. So there are some things that I want to talk about in terms of differences between this go-around and the last go-around. But before we do that, let's just look at the battle and understand what happens, and then we're going to go back and kind of analyze how we got this battle. So, the number one up there, that's the main Israeli army. So Jericho's kind of off to this side of the screen, if you will. Jericho would be kind of down, that there being the river. You see, if you were just go down a little bit and off to the screen, that would kind of be where Jericho would be. And then if you were to go up straight, you would have Galilee. And then Jerusalem would kind of be above number 8 if you kept going up, give or take. Number 1 is where Joshua assembles the bulk of his army. Okay? So that's where you got 25,000 people. He assembles the bulk of his army. Now, he assembles a smaller group of 5,000 elite warriors up by number 8. So he splits off 5,000 of his best warriors, and he puts them up between Bethel and Ai. Ai being the city we see down there, or by 6. So there's Ai. So that's Ai. In between Ai and Bethel, he assembles a small group of 5,000 warriors. These are like tactical insurgents. So he's going to use them. And so what he does is early in the morning, he sends the 25,000 for a frontal assault on Ai. Now keep in mind that they're in a valley. Ai's up on a hill. And so there's a valley. It's going down to where the army is. So the city of Ai can see the troops amassed. They saw him that night. They saw him kind of walking. They see him assembled in the morning. They're fresh off of just crushing the Israelites in chapter 7. They're probably a little arrogant. They just had victory. They're, probably feeling it. And so they may not be as cautious as they would normally be. A little pride before the fall. So he sends the 25,000 and they march directly on the city of Ai. Ai sees this, so they send their warriors out to confront them in the valley where that would be a good fighting spot. It's not really convenient to fight on a mountainside. It's kind of hard to do. Typically you'd march your armies out in battle back in the day. And so they march out, the blue arrow. You see them march out, and 4 is where they have their collision. All right, that's where the armies first meet. At this point, Joshua has told the 25,000, hey, when we meet them in battle, we're going to pretend to do a repeat of what we had happen in chapter 7. We're going to retreat. We're going to run away. We're going to scatter. We're going to make it look like we can't deal with the situation. So they run. That whole arrow, you see, they go all the way down. They run. All right? And so they make this retreat maneuver. All right? And as they make the retreat maneuver, the army follows them. The army of Ai follows them. Every man, it says, leaves the city. Every warrior leaves the city. They all run chasing the army, thinking victory is theirs. They're going to get the spoils. They leave the city completely unsecured. It's at this point that the 5,000 that have been waiting, they've been kind of moving along, creeping along the way. And now that they see that the city's empty, they walk in. And there are the women, the children, the gold, the silver, the livestock, all unprotected. So they round up the gold, the silver, and the livestock, the stuff that the Lord told them that they could keep, and they set fire to the city. And as soon as the army sees the fire, coming up out of the city, they turn. They turn around and they re-engage with the army of Ai. Ai turns around and they see smoke up in their city and they go, oh, that's not good. So they start moving to go.
Got smoked out.
Yeah. So they go to re-intercept the city. But as they do, the 5,000 warriors that were in the city come out and they pin the warriors of Ai between the main army and themselves, blocking their way back to the city. And so at that point, you've got the army sandwiched between the two armies of Joshua. And they wipe them out. They take the king alive. Joshua then impales him on a tree, hangs him on a tree, some form of tree execution, and lets him hang all day. And then they take him down and they bury him that night. They round up whatever spoils they can get, gold, silver, livestock, and the city's put to flames, and all of the inhabitants that were left are killed and wiped out according to the will of the Lord. So that's the battle plan for Ai. It's much more complicated than Jericho. Way more complicated than Jericho. Jericho was march around the city, do it for 6 days. On the seventh day, do it 7 times and blow your horns. You know, it was real simple. Walls are going to crash. You just kill everything. Easy. This is an actual full-blown battle plan. And it's not especially complicated. I mean, it's just luring everybody out of the city and then killing them all. I mean, it's a tried and true method of attacking, armies in the past. Still works, today. Hey, we're going to lead them out. You see that in every war, and then people follow out. So it's not like a crazy complicated, but it works. So it's a totally different battle plan than the time before. And in the end, we see that Ai is wiped out. They get the victory, but we see very different things happen. So first of all, you read verse 1. What do we see that's different this time about this battle versus the last battle?
God's giving them instructions.
Yes. That's the big difference. So, last time, they just were like, hey, grab a couple thousand people, go up there, wipe them out, we'll be back by lunch. Just totally arrogant, prideful, forgetting who gave them the victory at Jericho, and they go up there. And they don't even take Ai seriously. This time, Joshua prays first. He prays to the Lord, and he receives very specific instructions about how he is to conduct the battle. He says, take all the people. I have given you the city. It's a promise. He is promising them the city. I have given. Notice that that's right up in there. So take all the people. I have given you the city. And then he gives them, you shall take only its spoil, its cattle, its plunder. Notice that the first fruits of the land of Canaan belong to the Lord, Jericho. All of it went to the treasury. Just like we're to bring the first fruits of our earnings and all of our first produce, our income, our tithe to the Lord. Jericho was the first fruits of the land of Canaan. He commanded that it be brought to him. But now we're on to the second city. The first fruits is past. And now he says, you can have the spoils. If Achan had only been willing to wait one battle. If he had just been patient, the Lord would have given him all the gold he could have wanted. But his heart was wrong. And he led the whole nation astray. So now that the first fruits are out of the way, he says, you can have the spoil this time. Because I got the first fruits. And he lets him have it. And so Joshua rises up with this very detailed plan. Totally different than the time before. And as we look at that, what does the battle of Ai teach us about handling mistakes? Because we all make them. What does the battle of Ai teach us about handling mistakes?
I would just say, simple as it sounds, just learning from them, reflecting, making mistakes.
For sure. Anyone else? Learning from our mistakes?
I think when we make them, we need to turn to the Lord, like realize we made it, and then seek the Lord's instruction on what to do.
Exactly, yeah. Being humble enough to maybe realize that we did something and we weren't prayerful enough about it. Maybe our will got in the way. Maybe we prayed, but we kind of heard what we wanted to hear. That happens sometimes. Sometimes you're at the cash register and you're like praying, Lord, should I buy a lottery ticket? The answer is no, really. But sometimes you talk yourself into going, yeah, he wants me to win, so I'm going to buy a lotto ticket. And you throw it away a couple days later and go, that was a terrible investment. It's awful. Stuck that in a 401k, it would have actually been worth something in 40 years. Instead, it's just a piece of paper. Can't even start a fire with it. It's too small. Just useless. So we learn. And that means a lot of times humbling ourselves and being willing to admit maybe we didn't seek the will of the Lord the first time. At my house, in my bathroom, I have a little sign over my toilet. And every time my aunt comes to visit, she always looks at it. It's her favorite little sign in my whole house. And it's very unfortunate that it hangs above my toilet because it makes it difficult for her to really look at it very often. Because it's just but it's a quote from Henry Ford. And it says that failure is an opportunity to begin again more intelligently. And I've had that over my toilet for years. And it's a good quote. That's what I look at first thing in the morning. I wake up and there it is. It's in orange with black, and it's very basic. You've woken up and whatever mistakes you made, learn from them. Begin again. Don't be afraid.
Wash them away.
Wash them away. Exactly. Wash them away. Just purge them. Purge them away from your land. But it's true, we all make mistakes as Christians, as believers, as humans. We make mistakes. We do things wrong. And if we allow failure to stop us, we'll never grow as Christians. If Peter would have allowed denying Jesus to stop him from being an apostle, man, we would have missed out on just a lot that was in store for him. Mistakes are not always a terrible thing. Sometimes mistakes are what the Lord uses to teach us. It says in the Proverbs that the righteous man falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in time of calamity. It's not that you're not going to stumble. It's not that you're not going to fall. The question is what do you do after you fall? What do you do after you stumble? That's what matters. One of my favorite stories in the Bible, not because it's not a happy story. It's really negative. It's really sad. But David, they have the baby with Bathsheba, and the baby's sick. And David fasts, doesn't eat, doesn't do anything. He tears his clothes. He pours the ashes. My favorite form of mourning that we need to bring back. Talked about that last week. Why aren't we tearing? It's great. But he does that. And he fasts and prays and seeks the Lord until the baby dies. And then when the baby dies, they're terrified to tell him. But they finally go and they tell him that the baby has died. And then his reaction completely confounds them. But it is the blueprint of how do we handle mourning and suffering. He gets up. He washes himself. He anoints himself. He goes and he worships the Lord, and then he has a meal. He said, while the child was sick, yet there was still hope. But now that he's gone, what can I do? I will worship the Lord. And so we see David from this depths of despair, from the depths of sin, rise up, wash, anoint, worship, and then have a meal and resume his life. Made a terrible mistake with Bathsheba. Made a terrible sin. But he repented, he got up, and he moved on. It's all we can do is seek forgiveness and move forward and try to learn. That's what Joshua did. And so he gets a great victory here because they learn from the last time around. Okay, so we see the comprehensive battle. We talked about that. It's very cool. But notice that the entire nation executes the battle plan. Last time we had rebellion in the midst. This time everybody's on the same page. They're all with it. All 30,000 of them, they're all on the same page. They do it. And they have this obedient victory. What does that teach us about spending time in the Word? As Christians today, what is this victory? How does this help form our understanding of how important it is to spend time in the Word?
I got the victory in following the Word of God. If we're not spending time in the Word, we're not hearing what that equivalent would be in our life of what God's telling us to do. So essentially everything we'd be doing if we weren't in the Word would be chapter 7 instead of chapter 8.
Yeah. We might get lucky every once in a while. I mean, there are Christians that aren't in the Word that appear on the surface to be successful. But if you're not living God's plan for your life, are you really successful? No. I mean, even if you're financially successful, what difference does it make? Okay, so you have a big pool. All right, it's going to leak eventually. It's going to cost you money when it does. Everybody I know that owns a pool, eventually they leak. They got to be redone. It's just expense. And then one day you die, and all of the things that were important to you wind up in a yard sale. Your kids don't want them. They don't want your Tupperware and your Pyrex. They got their own. What are they going to do with it? Winds up being sold for pennies on the dollar. They don't want your piano. They don't want your stuff. They don't want your furniture. I mean, maybe if you got like some real fancy artwork, they might sell it at an auction. I remember like 3 years ago, it was my favorite estate sale ever. It was out in Germantown. And this dude, he had the ultimate gun collection. I mean, it was unreal. He had a pistol, a set of dueling pistols from George Washington. Yeah, and going forward, I mean, it was $1 million gun and rifle collection. And there were people from all over the country. They came and they were bidding and all of that. And I just thought that, and he had like 4 or 5 kids, and I just thought to myself, these rotten kids. Like, this guy's barely dead, and you've got all of these people here just picking over this guy's stuff. He spent a lifetime collecting all of this and building something to leave to you, and all you see now are dollar signs. Was it worth all of that effort, all of that time? Maybe that money could have been used differently. Where is your treasure stored up? Where are your priorities stored up? It doesn't mean that the Lord won't bless you financially. Proverbs has a lot of wisdom on the Lord blessing people financially that walk in His way. Following Jesus doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking a vow of poverty. But if money is a stronghold for you, if money is easily an idol for you, then He's going to keep it from you until you get broken of that. For other people, it's not. There are godly people I know that are worth a lot of money, and you just never know it. They drive a pickup truck. They're low key. They buy their clothes at Costco. They give money away all the time. They're generous. They like to give things away. That's what excites them, is being generous. They would much rather give money away than fly on a private plane. That's cool. That's cool. For them, money's not a stronghold. But wherever your strongholds are, the Lord's going to work on that. And He's going to call you into obedience. And if we don't want to have AIs in our strongholds, we've got to spend time in the Word. Who would like to read verses 30 through 35?
I will.
Okay.
30 through 35.
Yes, part 2 of the great victory of Ai.
At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones, upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord, and sacrificed peace offerings. And there, in the presence of the people of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. And all Israel, sojourner as well as native-born, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first to bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners who lived among them.
Okay. Thank you. So, verse 29 wraps up the victory of Ai. They hang the king, they cut him down, they bury him, they heap stones over him, and then comes this. So we have a victory with the Lord. Now the question is how do we celebrate a victory that God has given us? How do we glorify God? God has given them a victory. Now what? How is it that we glorify this? If this was a Roman army that had marched through a city, they would have a big tribute. And they would have a big celebration. And then after the end of a long campaign, the Roman general would go back to Rome. And they would have a big parade. And they would have the conquered with them, and they would show the spoils, and they would have all of the citizens of Rome going behind him. And then traditionally there was somebody that would whisper in the victor's ear that victory is fleeting, a reminder that these things can come and go. It's not permanent. But we don't see any of that. There's no statues, there's no... we're not erecting a statue to Joshua. It doesn't say, and then we erected a great statue to our general and commemorated a victory here. I don't see any of that. Instead, we see covenant renewal. We see glorifying the Lord. It's a blueprint for us, right? On how we're supposed to live our lives. So in Deuteronomy 27, Moses told them, he says, when you've crossed the Jordan, set up these stones on Mount Ebal as I command you today, and coat them with plaster, and you shall write very clearly all the words of this law on these stones you have set up. And then later on he commanded them that at the end of every 7 years, in the year of canceling debts, during the festival of the tabernacles, when all of Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, you shall read this law before them in the hearing. And so Moses gave them this command that he wanted done, that the Lord had commanded every 7 years, that they were going to gather together and they were going to do this. So what is Joshua doing when he writes the law on these stone tablets? What's he doing? He's fulfilling the command. And at the end, they build this altar, right, with stones, and then he writes this plaster 10 Commandment deal. So when they leave, and this is left behind, and somebody were to walk past it and see it, who gets the glory for this battle, for this victory? What are people going to see in terms of the victory here? What's the message that gets left behind?
To God be the glory.
To God be the glory. Yeah, it's not a statue of Joshua. It's not whatever. Pick a war memorial. Anybody ever been to Washington, D.C.? No? Nobody in here goes on 8th grade trips to Washington, D.C. anymore? Well, what has happened to this country? It's terrible. Chicago's not close. We got on a bus and we dealt with it for 16 hours. It's miserable. All right, so if you go to Washington, D.C., there's monuments everywhere. You got the Lincoln Memorial, you got the Jefferson Memorial, and you got the World War II Memorial, and you've got the Vietnam Memorial, which is the best one, I think. It's very humbling. You walk past all of these stone pillars, squares, and they just have the names of all the Americans that died, and it just goes on and on. There's like 60,000 names, and you're like, wow. Very humbling. You got the Korean War Memorial, which is really small, underfunded war. Not popular. Called it a police action. Didn't really count, so they get a small memorial. Great success story, though. South Korea. Real win. Much better than Vietnam. But anyway, they don't get much. And they got MASH, so I guess they got a hit comedy series. So I guess there was that. Which had the all-time viewership in America for the finale. And it wasn't until like 15 Super Bowls later that ad time was worth as much as the series finale for MASH. It was a huge show, culturally, for that generation. So I guess they got that. But, there's memorials everywhere. Tributes to the people. There's the Okinawa one with the soldiers and the flag. It's the famous, that's from Iwo Jima. Taking Iwo Jima on Okinawa. There's just all these different memorials, and you see them. Tributes to different things that Americans have done, various great Americans. All good stuff. And a lot of them have the word of the Lord somewhere in them. You can see that the country was built on biblical values. But this memorial doesn't have any of that. There's no man there. There's no individual at this memorial, at this altar. There's no one person. The only thing that's there is an altar to the Lord and some stone tablets. And notice that Joshua does what in some ways we see David do later on. They get there, they build an altar, he puts together offerings, they burn offerings, he writes out the law, then he gathers everybody together. And he reads the whole law, not just the 10 Commandments, the whole law to everybody. Didn't matter whether you were a top general, or you were a servant, or you were just a foreigner passing through. Everybody heard the word of the Lord. What's important about that? Why was it so important that they heard the word of the Lord? Whose victory it really is, for sure. And why else was it important that they hear the word of the Lord?
It's a reminder of what's expected of them
Yeah.
as God's people.
It's a reminder of what's expected. Paul says in Romans, how then can they call on the one that they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? We're commanded to go to the ends of the earth, sharing the gospel, spreading the good news. How will they hear if no one preaches? How will they know how to raise their children up if no one tells them? If it's not passed down? We see Israel all throughout its history. It has periods where you have good kings and then bad kings and then more bad kings and then a good king and then some bad kings. There's more bad ones than good ones. But when you see good ones, over and over again, we see that this king comes to power. He sees the state of his nation. And he lives out what the Lord says when he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. And we see that in those stories that the word of the Lord is preached. There's a Josiah who is, interesting fact, who is the king that loved the Lord the most, that sought the Lord the most in all of the Old Testament? David, most popular answer. Anyone else?
Does it start with an A? Does it start with an A?
Does not start with an A. It's a good guess. Anyone else? We got David, man after God's own heart. It's a good answer. Solomon, wisest man that ever lived. Got a little off track with foreign wives in the end. His Egyptian harem turned him in the wrong direction. Not good. He started strong, but he didn't finish strong. Anyone else? We got David, we got Solomon. Anyone else? Do you know?
Josiah?
Yes.
Starting off this whole thing, I'm like,
Yeah.
he gave me the answer.
Josiah, it says in the Bible that there was no king before him or after him who sought the Lord as much as Josiah. Josiah is listed as the most zealous king for God in all of the scriptures. And it's interesting that he becomes king. He's right at the tail end, like the Babylonians are about to burn that place down and carry everybody off. And he finds a copy, as one of his priests finds a copy of the law in the temple. And he brings it to him and starts reading it, and he tears his clothes and he pours ashes on his head and he mourns, and they all do that. It's the thing. I didn't mean to bring that up again, but it's just, that was part of it. And they have the greatest Passover in all of the history of Israel, and he reads the entire law to all of them. And they refocus themselves on the Lord. They rediscover the Lord because the word of the Lord is preached. In Judges, it says that a generation came up that did not know the Lord or the things that he had done. And so each one of them did what was right in their own eyes. See that today. You have a generation coming up that does not know the Lord nor the things that he has done. It's not just not knowing the Lord. You're not even aware of the things that he's done. How can you know the Lord, have faith in the Lord, if you're not even aware of the things that the Lord has done? And so the Lord commands every 7 years to his people, you got to read this out loud to everybody. Everybody's got to hear all of the rules. And every year we got to get together and have a Passover. And we got to talk about what God's done. It's been 3,000 years since the Jews were in slavery. They still talk about it at Passover. Still part of it. It's just, we remember. You eat bitter herbs. It's part of it. You eat horseradish, really full, pungent horseradish. And the idea is to eat it until you start welling up, to remember the bitterness of slavery. It's part of the Passover celebration. Just a reminder. My mom was not a fan of the bitter herbs. She didn't do them. She wanted Jell-O. It's her thing. She goes, is there going to be Jell-O at Passover? I said, no. There will be bitter herbs, though. But how can they believe if they haven't heard? So they bring themselves to the Lord after this victory. They refocus. They repent. They realize that they've done wrong, and they realize that everything that they do has to be focused on the Lord. And so before they take one step further after this victory, no, they don't even start dividing the spoils. They don't even start a barbecue. They don't do anything until they build this altar and they offer a sacrifice and they read the word of the Lord. They give thanks and they praise and they reattune themselves to God and put Him first. And it's a magnitude different than the first time. And it's what we have to do and keep doing if we're going to stay in victory. Next week we'll see that, unfortunately, they forgot again. And this is so common with us in our lives, that we have great victory because we keep the Lord in focus, and then we get a victory and we forget why we got the victory, and then we start coasting. And we screw up. This is what we do. Remember, at work for years, the mantra at this company I worked for was, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. It's just, we're either getting better or we're getting worse. There's no such thing as treading water. It doesn't exist. And it's true in your relationship with the Lord. Your relationship with the Lord is either getting stronger or it's atrophying. A muscle doesn't stay in a constant state. It either grows through forced use or it atrophies and it shrinks. Your relationship with the Lord is the same way. You either force it to grow by desiring Him and spending time with Him, or you become a little more worldly. It's just a matter of which AI you are on that day. Are you number 1 or number 2? Let's pray. We'll journal. Let's journal. Then we'll pray.